Hey everyone, this is David Pike, the MotorCity mechanic. Now in today's video, we're going to be working on a 2018 Jeep Compass. And we're going to be removing the secondary / auxiliary / supplemental battery. Yes, this vehicle has two batteries, and we're going to be talking about that in today's video. Now the information in this video applies to a 2018 Jeep Compass. Now if you've got one that's a couple years newer or a couple years older, the information should be the same. Now this vehicle also has two batteries, and that's what this is going to be about today. We've got the larger primary battery that we're used to seeing that's located under the hood, and then we've got a secondary / auxiliary / supplemental battery, depending on who you're talking to, that's located right in front of it. Now that battery is used for what we call the ESS system. That's the electronic start-stop. And what that does is when you pull up to a traffic light or stop sign, from time to time it will actually cut the engine off. But as soon as you let off on the brake pedal, it starts right back up and you continue on your way as if nothing happened. It's a system that some people don't even pay attention to, or in others it's aggravating. There's actually a switch somewhere on the dash or on the console that you can disable it, but then every time you cycle the key on and off, you've got to do it again. Nonetheless, that's what we're talking about today, removing and replacing that second battery. There's some important things you need to pay attention to when you're working on this, because being that there's two batteries, if you disable one battery, the other one's still live, meaning there's still 12 volts in the system as if you never touched the first battery. So you've got to pay extreme attention to that, because if you're working on airbags or something else, there could be some damage or things that happen to you or the vehicle. So pay attention. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Now, with the hood open, we can go ahead and point out some important things that we're going to be working with today. The first one here is our primary battery. That's the typical 12-volt battery that we're used to using. All these years, we only had one battery. Now we're moved on to two, and again, that's because of that electronic start-stop. Now the primary battery is much larger than the secondary. In order to get to some of the terminals, especially the positive, you got to take this cover off. You can see where it attaches to the battery right here. We've got different fuses and other cables that are mounted on that. Over here on the negative side, we've got a special sensor that we don't want to damage. That's called the IBS, Intelligent Battery Sensor. You can't unbolt it from the terminal, and also there is a connector here you can unplug, so if you need to get a little more room when you're taking this off and try not to damage it, you can unplug it. So that brings us to that secondary or auxiliary battery. It's mounted directly in front of the primary. It's right here. On top of it, we've got the battery hold down, and on that we've got what we call a battery relay module. Now, being that the system has two batteries, we need to be careful when we're working under the hood or if we're removing one or both of the batteries. If you go ahead and you unbolt the negative here, move it to the side, what you can do is you can check and you'll find out you've still got 12 volts on the system. Things will still work. That is because this secondary battery is still hooked up. Same thing, if I was to disconnect the secondary negative cable from that battery, I've still got voltage on because the primary is hooked up. So again, when you start taking things off, remember both of these negatives have to be disconnected before we deal with the positive terminals. Otherwise, we're going to arc something out, short things, and we're probably going to blow some expensive fuses. So take care. So first thing we're going to work on is unbolting the negative cable from the primary. Now when it comes to disconnecting that primary battery, one thing you can do so you don't have to worry about damaging the IBS or having to disconnect the connector is you can take the cable actually off of it right here. It's a 10mm nut, nothing special. Take it off, kind of sit it out of the way, and position it so that we don't have to worry about it coming back up and making contact with that post while we're dealing with the positive cable. So now we'll move over to that secondary or auxiliary battery and we'll take the negative off of it. Now the cables on that secondary battery are positioned like this. We've got the negative on the driver's side or left side of the vehicle, and we got the positive over here up under the coolant pressure tank. It's got a 10mm nut on there. When taking it off, remember, just pay attention. We don't want to touch anything we don't need to. We're just going to back this off. Reach down in here with our hands and try not to drop the nut. We'll do the same thing we did with that primary battery. We'll lift up on that terminal or cable and position it up out of the way. Now we can start working on removing that battery relay module. Now the whole reason why we're taking that module off is it's mounted directly to the hold down for the auxiliary battery. So when we take that hold down off, we got to kind of maneuver it and get it out of the way. If the module was still bolted with all the cables, that would make it difficult. Again, two 10mm nuts. Now we just got to kind of wiggle it up and off. Now we can just position it out of the way as well. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and work on removing the two positive cables that are on the auxiliary battery. Again, it's held in with a 10mm nut, and you've got direct access to it, and you've got plenty of room to get the battery out without removing the coolant bottle. Now, if for some reason you opt to do that, it kind of just slides up in this upper radiator support and over to the side and snaps in place. It's got a couple little fingers that you've got to pry up before you can do that. One, you've got access here, the other one's up under here. But again, you don't necessarily have to. You can get to it from right here. Now before you go putting your socket or your wrench on there, again, double check to make sure that none of the cables came back over and touched any of the negative terminals. As long as they haven't, you're safe to go ahead and start taking this loose, because you've got some metal brackets in this area and it's easy to touch it on something. Again, there are two cables up under this nut. Just remember when you go back not to forget one. Lift up on one of them. And then also the second one. Now we'll move on to the battery hold down. Now that battery hold down for the auxiliary battery uses a 13mm nut over here by the washer bottle. The other end of the bracket actually sits into this metal plate as part of the battery tray, and also it's the mount for the engine controller. So what we're going to do is just going to kind of lift up and keep going up, and we'll start wiggling it out. As you can see right there, there's a little hook portion, and it goes into a notch up under here. Now looking at the battery, you'll see that we've got an insulated blanket around there. And sometimes it'll get up under the bracket right here, so it's kind of hard to access. What I recommend doing is pulling on it and get it positioned and remove it, because if you leave it on the battery, it's going to move around. It's going to make it kind of difficult to squeeze on the battery to kind of get it up out of here. Now if that removed, we can either use the studs that those cables mounted to. We also have enough room to grab onto the body of the battery and lift up. Again, as you can see, we've still got clearance even with that coolant bottle in place. Now your replacement battery may or may not come with the studs that are threaded in both for the positive and negative terminals. If it doesn't, you're going to need to remove them. In this case, these are going to need an inverted Torx socket, and that's going to be an E5. One thing I love about these little nubby ratchets are that they're not long enough to touch the post, so take care again when taking the studs out that you don't touch the two posts with your ratchet. So we're just going to back these off and then transfer them over to the replacement battery. Simple enough. Now there is a torque spec for those threaded studs. That's 53 inch-pounds. Personally, it feels a little tight, like it's about to strip out. I just run them down and then snug them up by hand. But if you want the spec, I'm not going to promise that it ain't going to cause them damage, and this is from the service information, 53 inch-pounds. So now we're ready to grab our replacement battery and gently position it down inside the battery tray. Move any of those wires out of the way, so that way we can get the insulated wrap, position it around it, and drop it down in there. Now we're ready for the battery hold down. Now when you get ready to install that hold down bracket, pay attention to a couple things. Remember, this is that bent end right here that goes inside this metal plate, just above the insulated wrap, but just below the little metal ledge that goes in there. And also right here, this piece of plastic that has the positive and negative sign on there. That needs to sit inside the recessed portion of the battery right here. That's how you know if the battery is left to right in the correct position. So we'll go ahead and tuck this up in here, work it on, slide it down top of the stud, move the battery until that sits down inside the groove, and now we're ready for our 13mm nut. So I'm going to go ahead and use my cordless impact and just kind of run the nut down and then I'll come back and double check it. Now you can just snug it down and that's fine. Or if you want to spec on that as well, that's 124 inch-pounds on the nut for the battery hold down bracket. So now we're ready to hook up those two positive cables to the post on the auxiliary battery. So find out where they are. Now this one right here is the one that was on the bottom. The upper one actually has some raised edges here that kind of keep everything squared. That was the one that went on top. Just remember that. Grab our 10mm nut and kind of start it by hand. Now the torque for the nut for that positive cable, 49 inch-pounds. Again, 49 inch-pounds. So now we can go ahead and grab our battery relay module. Now pay close attention to the metal washer slash bushings. They can fall out, so make sure you've got them and you've got them reinstalled. It's going to gently sit on top of the studs of that battery hold down bracket. Now there's no spec for these nuts that hold it down, so just run them down, snug them up. Now we're getting real close to just about having this done. All we got to do is deal with the two negative battery cables. At this point, when we hook this one up, there may be some sparks. That's just all the systems coming alive and just kind of reminding you that this battery is hot. It's hooked up into the system. So we'll look for that negative cable, grab it, and like I said, you may see a spark. Same thing on this, we've got a torque spec. And that torque spec is 49 inch-pounds. Again, 49 inch-pounds. Now the last thing we got to do is we've got to hook up the negative cable to the primary battery. If you remember, we left the terminal and the IBS in place. We took it off directly there. So what we're going to do is grab our nut, kind of position it correctly, and then we've got a spec on this as well. And that spec is 97 inch-pounds. So it's different than the rest of them. 97 inch-pounds on the cable, nut, at the IBS. At that point, everything's hooked up. So hopefully you learned something new today when it comes to working on a vehicle that has two batteries. As long as you pay attention and you follow the steps, there shouldn't be any problems or any damage that's caused because you left one of them hooked up while you're still working on the car. Now, if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up on YouTube. Don't forget you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you have any comments or suggestions about anything you saw in today's video, just scroll down at the bottom of the video and leave a comment. Also, if you'd like to shop on Amazon, which everybody does, scroll into that description immediately below this video and you'll see a link. Click on that link. Make that your Amazon homepage, and anything that you buy will help support this channel. Once again, everybody, thanks for watching.